Good morning to this live webinar on plastics recycled content. Thank you for joining from wherever location you are. We're waiting a couple of minutes that all participants are connected. Today we are quite a lot, more than 400 people have registered. So let's be patient another minute and then we'll start with the program of today. Just a quick reminder, you can ask your questions in the dedicated box in the Zoom control bar settings, and the presentations will be available afterwards to all the registrants. So today we have quite of a big plan, a big program ahead of us with 5 speakers, and I hope it will be interesting and you will learn something new possibly, or will be a repetition of topics for some of you. Okay, so let's start. Just a brief words about this webinar and the program of today. So we'll start with facts and figures about the current situation of recycling and use of recyclates in different applications. With Patricia Van Gerove from Plastics Europe. Then we'll go to have a look about recyclates in the transport packaging with Klaus-Peter Schmidt from Mauser Packing Solutions. Afterwards, there will be Vaidisha Spencer, Secretary General of PSEP, talking about the future of circular polyolefins. And then an interesting ideas on the use of recycled content in green public procurement by Herman van Rost from Styrenics Circular Solution. And last but not least, from IK, which is also the organization that organized with us this webinar, Isabel Schmidt said on legal measures for the uptake of recyclates. So, we wanted also to give you a little bit of a overview on the background of this webinar and on recycled content in general. As you know, recycled content has become really one of the main topics of discussion in policies today, but also in commitments from companies. This concept, or the idea to have it in a policy-related document, I think first arose when the first circular economy package was presented. And there were, in fact, many initiatives under this package of the European Commission working on sustainability of plastics, but also other materials. And in this context, in fact, we got the plastic strategy. And the plastic strategy indeed has a long history in the sense that many of its activities we're still working on some of them. In fact, the strategy was eventually adopted in 2018, and together with it, there was an action plan. And this action plan, we had the legislative proposal on single-use plastics, but also Annex 3, which called for a pledge campaign for any company, for any brand owner to reach 10 million tons of recyclates by 2025. So, in fact, in 2018, eventually we had the adoption of the Single-Use Plastics Directive, which is the first time we saw, and we will have to live with recycled content quotas for beverage bottles. So that definitely created, if you allow me, a precedent in terms of recycled content for packaging, and not necessarily, but also for other applications. And then that pledge campaign that started as a simple annex of the plastic strategy has grown to become what is called now the Circular Plastics Alliance, which again has kept the same objective, which is to reach the 10 million tons of recyclates in different applications for different polymers. And today it's a quite successful alliance supported by the European Commission, but driven by the industry with 282 signatories and a detailed work plan for the future. And in that context, for example, we had probably the first discussion about the source of recycled content. So whether it should be only post-consumer waste or in addition, pre-consumer waste. And it comes also with a dedicated monitoring system to facilitate the communication about numbers and also the reliability of them and how they are communicated to avoid also double counting when, of course, there are different actors of the same value chain reporting back to this monitoring system. And so we have, as said, this new activities in 2018, and somehow those are still living today. And in addition, in 2020, the European Commission also has come with its own circular economy package, eventually called the European Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan. And also this action plan, as said, builds upon the work started under the plastic strategy, including, for example, the call to have all packaging placed in the European market recyclable or reusable in the most efficient way by 2030, but also comes with the proposal to have mandatory requirements for recycled content for certain families of products, notably packaging, construction materials, and vehicles. So you can see how this topic, the recycled content, is bigger than it appeared at the beginning. And it's going to touch on many sectors, and therefore bringing different aspects and issues that will have to be taken into account by the policymakers and the stakeholders, of course, which are also part of the same dialogue. So going back, therefore, to conclude on this very short background explanation, we are pleased, IK and UPC, to have you here and to start brainstorming about this topic. As said, in the light of these activities that are currently taking place. And also the program was developed in a view to accompany the audience in understanding how big this topic and varied is, and how many variables have to be taken in consideration when discussing the topic of recycled content. So we wanted also to start with this particular webinar, also to start a series of webinars dedicated to sustainability at large. And again, this is the opportunity to have different ideas and have some brainstorming with you and the speakers, of course, about what should be the best actions for the future. So you can already pin down the next sustainability webinar. Most probably, given the success of today's webinar, will also be dedicated to recycled content. So please pin it for Tuesday, 26th October this year, the same time. So thank you for keeping with us. We try to keep it as planned, maximum until 1:30 today. Practical, so as said at the beginning, presentations will be available after the webinar, and you can pose questions while the speakers are talking or shortly after in the Q&A box. And there will be also, if time allows, a final Q&A round with all the speakers present. So it's with joy that I introduce you to the first speaker. As said, this is Patricia Vangeluwe. I'm going to give the floor to her and tell you a little bit about her. So she's currently the Circularity Director of Plastics Europe. She graduated from the University of Leuven in 1984 with a PhD in organic chemistry, followed by a postdoctorate at the University of Pretoria. And she also holds a master's degree in controllership from the Blerick Management School. And since '89, she has been working in Shell, Montel, Basel, and Lyon de Basel in different positions in the fields of research, marketing, strategy, communication, and human sources. And also she has been working in different countries, such as Belgium, Germany, South America, and South Africa, and traveled extensively around the world. So since October 2010, she is part of Plastics Europe to lead their pan-European end-of-life and circularity team. And together with the expert team, she manages and coordinates the scientific content to support the association mission. So I give the floor to Patricia. Patricia, you have to unmute yourself and also, yeah, voila.
Voila. Can you hear me? That's better, hopefully.
Yes, great. We hear you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and inviting Plastics Europe to this interesting webinar. Before we zoom into the plastic recycling and the use of recyclates and different applications, I want to share with you the circular economy of plastics, if my screen does it.
You know, it's not moving yet.
It's not moving here either, so let me see what I can do.
It's on the bottom on the right. Oh, okay.
Can you see it now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so before I zoom into that, I wanted to share with you the circular economy for plastics, actually, the European Overview Status 2018. This will help us to understand also the overall challenges that must be addressed to increase the quality and the quantity of recycled plastic waste in Europe. This graph you see here gives you the overview of the production. So if you follow the blue lines, you see the production of virgin plastics, and you have many exports and imports. Then you have also the conversion to plastic parts and end products in Europe. Again, you have some exports and imports. And then the third blue box in the middle here, you see the consumption of plastic materials into products. So that's the conversion of plastics into bottles or parts of cars, for instance, bumpers or insulation of homes. The use phase here is very dependent on the lifespan of the application. You have applications that have 1 year and go up to over 50 years. So therefore, the consumption and the waste collection cannot be read together. In a growing economy, you will have more consumption. So in a given year, your waste collection will be lower than the consumption. It's also because some waste is not actually collected or recorded and therefore not counted towards the waste collection. So for 2018, we had a waste collection of 29 million tons, and 55 million tons were consumed in Europe. So if you follow then the blue line, what happens actually to this waste that is collected and then sorted? Well, still 7 million tons goes to landfill, which is a shame. It's a valuable resource we need to get our hands on. The energy recovery, you have 12 million tons going into energy recovery. It's capturing the energy from that plastic waste. Also here, we have an untapped potential, of course, of a lot of million tons that we need to try to get into the recycling stream. And finally, in 2018, we had about 9.4 million tons going into recycling operations in Europe. This here is also exported part of it, and then you go slowly and steady into the green bar here with 7.5 million tons going into, of that waste, sorted waste, going into European recyclates. With the next slide, I want to zoom in a little bit on the recyclates there. What is happening, again, the green line here, more than the 9 million tons of post-consumer plastic waste. Yeah, it's important to note that the waste study we are performing on a 2-yearly basis with Plastics Europe and their partners, it's only about post-consumer waste. We are making an update that will be available and published at the end of the year for 2020 data, and we will also have pre-consumer plastic waste, as both Sylvia already indicated, are valuable resources for the circular economy. Almost 80% of that 9 million ton was treated in Europe. I indicated there were some exports here that you see here going out. So this middle green bar says that 5 million tons is the output of recyclates in Europe. Also a part of that is exported to then finally result in 4 million ton of plastic recyclates available in 2018 and sold in European products. If you remember the previous slide, we have about 55 million ton consumed of virgin plastics in the market today and 4 million tons of plastic recyclates. So we can certainly do more, and that's the reason why we have various actions going on to accelerate that change. Also interesting to note is that mostly it's mechanical recycling currently as a recycling technology being used to recycle plastics. Very little to non-chemical recycling is happening in 2018, and lots of activities are happening in this space as we speak, with investment announcements, with chemical recycling that will complement the mechanical recycling, also dissolution recycling. All of them will be needed to achieve a circular economy of plastics.
Excuse me, Patricia.
Yes.
We have some, let's say, comments that participants cannot read very well the slides. Can you try maybe again to put it on slide
full
mode?
Screen, and I hope I can then go forward.
Yes.
So apologies for that, because I didn't seem to be able to move with that one. I'll try again. So so you see again here the very little chemical recycling happening. This leads me to also wanting to explain a little bit what is now the source, the composition of the plastic waste, and it works, fortunately. Thank you, Sylvia. So the composition of the plastic waste today is about, now it works too quick, it's 61% going into packaging. So the majority of the plastic waste, these 20 million tons of collected plastic waste, is coming from packaging. It's not a surprise because packaging is the shortest lived application compared to other applications you see on the screen. Building and construction, automotive, agriculture, and all the others form the other part of the plastic waste. When you look at the right-hand side, and what happens to the 4 million tons of recyclates, which are in 2000 or were in 2018 sold in Europe? Well, actually, close to 50% of that goes into building and construction, followed by 24% going to packaging, and then a big share goes also to agriculture. It shows that the waste of one sector is a valuable resource for another sector, because the majority comes from packaging, but the majority of the waste, the 4 million tons of that plastic recyclates, goes into building and construction today. So another look at rare applications now. So another to say building and construction. So what are those 50% building and construction materials today? You will hear also a very good presentation later on transport and other applications from Klaus. But here you see where those 2 million tons in 2018 went. It is in pipes and dimple sheets, for instance, profile boards, windows, the PVC windows being recycled today, the flooring, but also road construction production. So this is a few examples of the building and construction application. Then we have 1 million ton going into packaging, the packaging products and applications you see here on the left-hand side, with garbage bags, bucket and barrels, beverage bottles, packaging tape, for instance, but also shampoo bottles, cleaning detergent bottles, and transport and shipping foils, for instance, with bubble wraps as well. So that's the 1 million ton of recyclates going into the market today. Then we have the automotive and electrical and electronic, but also other applications where you see a whole range of applications where recyclates are ending up, with under the hood applications for cars, for instance, but also in bumper applications, some park benches, vacuum cleaner parts, but also drill housing, hangers, coffee machines, sports shoes, and cable casing. So a whole lot of applications where part of the 4 million tons end up into the European market. And the last one I wanted to show some examples of is the agriculture and gardening applications. So from rain barrels to composters to raised beds, but also flower tubs, bottles, hanging baskets, irrigation pipes, and cultivation pallets. It's all applications where the recyclates are ending up today. We've now talked about what is the composition of the plastic waste of those 29 million tons being collected, which is the majority is from packaging with 61%. We've also touched upon where are those 4 million tons sold, with 50% going to building and construction. And the next slide is another way to look at it as well, is what is the size of this market and how much of this market is now plastic recyclate. The size of the bubbles you see on the graph here with packaging being the biggest market for plastics with 40%. There you see that only 5% of recyclates is going into packaging application today. And lots of activities are going on to make this a much larger share. The building and construction is the second market share with 20%. There we already see a market share of 14% of recyclates going in. And the biggest part here is smaller agricultural part, with 20% of recyclates already being part of that market. This gives us the idea of what can and needs to happen to increase those applications. And when we now look at it a little bit from a historical perspective, with this slide, what is the evolution actually since 2006 in 2018. Well, the good news is with the average growth you see here on the left-hand side and the bottom, I hope you can see my cursor. Well, the annual average growth of recycling was the highest with 6% compared to close to 5% energy recovery and fortunately 4.7 annual growth reduction of landfill. But saying that, when you look at absolute numbers already talked to you in the beginning, 7 million tons are still ending up in landfills, 12 million tons are still going to energy recovery, and 9 million tons find their way into the recycling operations. Well, better waste collection systems are absolutely needed. Innovation in sorting and recycling technologies can also lead to higher quality efficiencies. And we need to close those landfills for plastics, as 7 million tons are simply wasted, a resource we need to get our hands on. So Plastics Europe is fully committed to the circular plastics, with circular economy with plastics. And this data we have been producing helps actually stakeholders to better understand the life cycle of plastics. Among the many initiatives we drive, we are an active member also of the Circular Plastic Alliance that has been identified by the European Commission. And we've used the Plastics Euro data 2008 to look at what are the barriers for the 5 main sectors we've identified: packaging, or we are working on packaging, building and construction, automotive, electric and electronic, and agriculture. The main drivers that have been identified by the CPA are here shown in black. It's the adequate quality of recycled plastics, adapted to the requirements of the second life application. We need the right quality, for instance, to go into packaging application, with many of those application being food contact. We need to penetrate the food contact market, and it is certainly possible with innovation. The availability and security of the supply of recycled plastics. When you want 30%, for instance, of recyclates into a certain application, well, the converters need to make sure they can get their hands on this supply of recycled plastics. Otherwise, it could lead to a market that is not available for that application anymore. So essential is to have the availability and security of the adequate quality, and then also the competitiveness, attractiveness, acceptance versus virgin plastics. All this has been addressed or is addressed in the Circular Plastic Alliance, and to create the conditions for a pull market for plastics. And the obstacles will be addressed through those 4 boxes you see here in blue, by improving, first of all, the design of plastic products and packaging. A better design will lead to better quality that will then go into the feedstock, the waste that will be as feedstock, but there we also need to increase the collection of all plastic waste. We need to collect in the first place, otherwise we cannot improve that waste. And we need to improve by sorting that better, so that the feedstock which goes into the market is the quality required for the converters that use that recycled plastics. And then finally, of course, we need to drive that demand and stimulate that demand for plastic recyclates into European products. And you will see an interesting presentation from Henban later on how that can be done. But the standards is a key point, not only for the design of the plastic products, but also for the feedstock and the sorting to get the right quality. R&D and investments are needed, investments in new recycling technology, further improve the mechanical recycling, increase mechanical recycling, and increase significantly also the share of chemical recycling, dissolution recycling to be complementary in order to achieve a circular economy for plastics. This leads me to the last slide, which is driving the plastic circular economy. So from the production, I gave you some figures in 2018, to the conversion, to the consumption, not to forget the importance of reuse and repair in the circular economy. We need to collect more of that plastic waste, which ends in, ultimately on the market, which is the blue bar here. We need to get our hands on that waste, collect it all, minimize the energy recovery. From the 12 million ton, we need to get our hands a lot more to get it through to sorting. And of course, we want to eliminate landfilling as well. So better sorting, innovation in sorting with minimizing the residues here will lead eventually to the quality feedstock that goes into the recycling stream, with minimizing the leftovers here, and goes back into recyclates, either into conversion, because you have the polymers you get your hand off via mechanical recycling, or chemical recycling, where you have the feedstock which goes back into the production of raw materials, getting to similar properties of or the same properties as the virgin material, which will get to higher qualities indeed to penetrate the packaging market, for instance, in food contact. This will increase the use of recyclates into the production of raw material and decrease the use of virgin feedstock into that plastic. So together we can and will drive the circular economy of plastics. So thank you very much, Sylvia. With that, I want to hand over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for this exhaustive presentation, Patricia. So if there are questions, that's the right moment to pose them. Maybe while some of them arrive, I can ask you a question, which is about, let's say, your view concerning the recyclates for food contact application. How do you see that? Since we're still missing quite important documents from the regulators in this regard.
For the food contact applications, what we need to do is that, Sylvia?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, you need for sure to have the approvals of the food contact materials in the first place. So we need to accelerate the approval. So, I mean, with my presentation at the end, and you will see that Isabel will talk to that, we are doing a lot of actions and lots, if possible, of innovation, but we need the proper framework, the legal framework, in order to ensure that we have that framework to make it all happen. And one of them is food contact applications. You need approvals of the food contact, not only for mechanical recycling, because for the moment, very little, and mostly PET gets food approval. So that needs to change. And I think there will be some hints to that in the presenters that will follow. But also we need the right framework for chemical recycling. We need the right conditions and framework in order for chemical recycling to penetrate, also dissolution recycling, and ensure that this can then get into the food contact applications. Because with chemical recycling, you can produce virgin-like qualities that is then suitable for many food contact applications. But again, the right legal framework is important. It's under discussion today, and extremely important that we get those enabling conditions to make it all happen.
I received now a question about whether the polymers used for synthetic textiles, do they enter in those streams or they are considered separately?
For the synthetic, so textiles, I mean fibers, when you look at this plastic waste also, that's post-consumer we are having. So textiles, which would enter as a post-consumer, will of course be coming in that stream, but mostly that's treated separately.
Okay. Here I have also a question about whether there are numbers available about how much of plastic product ends up in the landfill. Ending on landfill come to the sea. I don't know. I don't even know how this is a question.
Well, it's a very good question, actually. Often, I mean, we have 7 million tons, if I recall well from the numbers now, that goes still into landfill. I mean, they should not go into landfill. And indeed, if they are in landfill, which are not well, I mean, if then it needs to be a well-regulated landfill. If it would not be a well-regulated landfill, it would escape that landfill. That's, of course, an issue. So, but normally in Europe, you would hope that we have these regulated landfills. But saying that, these 7 million tons, we need to stop it because we need those 7 million tons to get the circular economy and get it back into material for the circular economy. Litter is one thing we absolutely need to prevent. And by doing a circular economy and getting our hands on and working together to make sure we collect it and we send it to sorting facilities will absolutely be key for the circular economy, and also to this question on landfill and littering.
Yes, here they ask also, what are the key innovations to increase recycle quality in your opinion?
It's everywhere, actually. With the CPA, we identified all the R&D. So you might find it useful to look at the R&D report. So it's everything through, better sorting, recycling and sorting. It's the innovation or the technologies that are actually existing here, like pyrolysis, chemical recycling, also the dissolution, they need to penetrate and have the right enabling framework, because this will all lead to the high quality that we require on the market. So it's everything. It's a combination of R&D and mechanical recycling, or even on the design of products to get compatible polymers within a given application, so that you get the sorting, or compatible substrates, so that you get the sorting for high quality. So it's a variety of things we've identified in the CPA, and we are feverishly working on it.
Here they ask, well, how can we enhance the collection, since it's very difficult and it's very complicated to get it organized for some B2B streams?
Yeah, Belle, that's really by working together. Collection is key. We've identified, of course, that collection is key. So, and you need the member states for that. So we're working with the CPA, we've identified design, but design not only for the products, but also for collection systems. So a lot of work needs to happen there. It's key that all stakeholders join forces to make it happen.
Okay, thank you very much, Patricia. There are many questions, but time is limited, so we'll go to the next one. Thank you, and I'll see you later.
See you later, bye-bye.
Thank you. So I'm glad now to introduce Klaus Peter Schmidt from Mauser Werke. He holds a master's degree on plastics technology and has been employed by Mauser Werke since 1995. And there he holds the position and is responsible for packaging development, sustainability management. He holds more than 20 years of experience in the design and development of industrial packaging made from plastics, and is also very much engaged in various national and international technical working groups and industry initiatives, such as the IK Working Group on Environment Sustainability, also the Technical Committee of BKB, and also is a governor of the former ISO TC 122 Working Group 8 on plastic drums. And talking about Mauser, we're talking about a worldwide leading company in the field of rigid industrial packaging. And Mauser today has become a full lifecycle service provider, including not only manufacturing, but also reconditioning, reuse, and recycling activities of industrial packaging as well. Well, so Klaus, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia, for the kind introduction, and hopefully you can see the full screen.
Yes,
at this moment.
We see everything. Yes, perfect.
So it's in presentation mode. Okay, thanks for the opportunity and the invite, and to talk a little about recyclates in transport/industrial packaging, because as you said in the introduction, Mauser is actually not doing transport packaging, but we are doing industrial packaging, which is still quite close together, because we are talking about B2B packaging and not so much about consumer packaging. And therefore, maybe there are also during the presentation some quite specific topics that you typically don't find in the discussions about recyclates when you talk about the main focus, as I see it at this moment, consumer packaging. So looking at transport packaging, I think it's important first to understand that it's quite versatile. So there are really many different types and designs of this kind of packaging that you can think about. They can be either flexible or rigid. So you have quite various materials that are used in transport packaging. So from ABS, EPS, but also polyolefins, HDPE, LDPE. As said, it's versatile applications. And I think if doing drums or being an expert in doing drums and IBCs, I don't believe I would be a perfect expert in doing rigid or flexible FIBCs or boxes. So I think it's always important to point out, if you talk about the use of recyclates, that you also talk about the dedicated application, because function in the end, especially in transport packaging, is key. So if you don't meet the requirements that your clients, that the market is asking, and the core function is the protection of the good that we are transporting, then you miss your target. Also important to understand is that we basically talk about B2B packaging. So the consumer or the end customer is often not involved in this kind of packaging. And we are talking maybe even more than with consumer packaging. We are talking about an international market. So whatever we have as regulation that is often not country specific, it's European or even global regulation that we have to deal with. So there's no one size fits all solution. And during this presentation, therefore, I can also only talk about some solutions for drums and IBCs, whereas the other packaging shown here might have different approaches, but I think also with similar elements at least. So one important topic or comment from my end is also, even if we do industrial packaging, so whatever we generate as recyclate from recollected packaging of ours, that is still post-consumer recyclate because it's made out of used packaging. So it's not generated from the production process, but from used products. On the next slide, again, I want to highlight function is key. And we at least see also the recycling or the circularity of our products, that is not only recycling, but also reuse. We see it as one of the elements of sustainable packaging. So first of all, or not first of all, but another element, it needs to be effective in the beginning. As said already, if we cannot secure the function of the packaging to allow a secure transport of often dangerous goods that are transported around the world, then we better stop doing the packaging at all. So effectiveness is a key criteria. Also the safe materials that we use, that we generate safe transport, and also in the light of the Packaging Waste Directive, for example, you have also the demand that it needs to be as effective or as efficient as possible. So looking at weight reduction is also always a key topic for us, and really make a fit for purpose design. But in the end, we can combine, when we talk about plastic, we can combine material, process, and the design of our products to achieve the best performance possible. But the best performance possible has to match the requirements. And we can always challenge, or our salespeople, my sales colleagues, can challenge the requirements that are set sometimes long ago, and if they are still really needed. But at a certain degree, especially if we talk about regulated packaging like UN approved packaging, we also have to accept that a certain performance is needed and required by the market. And that is also driving often how much recyclate we can really put in a packaging to generate the suitable performance. So I think Patricia already mentioned in her presentation that return and returning used packaging is key for anything we think about circularity. So if we want to reuse some packaging, we have to collect it. If you want to generate recyclate from plastic packaging, you also have to collect the packaging before you can do anything of it. The return logistics that you see with drums, IBCs, so large plastic, industrial plastics packaging, that is basically two-folded at this moment in the European landscape. So you, on the one hand, you have often country-specific industry schemes that have been founded, I think, almost around the 1990s, where really the industry partners came together and at that time set up recollection schemes for packaging that otherwise would have no home for being collected. So a perfect example for this kind of schemes is RIG Key, as we, or the RIG, as we have in Germany. So it's a license fee based system. It's addressing different but specific waste streams. It's collecting multiple types, also different volumes. So from 1 liter agro bottle to 60 liter, 220 liter drum. It's in majority, it's country specific. You don't find it in any country of Europe at this moment, but it's country specific often, and the focus is clearly the responsible disposal at first and or collection of this empty packaging, and then as a follow-up, the material recycling. The second interesting collection scheme that you find for this kind of packaging in Europe is the return programs of reconditioners or manufacturers. So these are pickup systems where packaging are collected at the emptier site. Typically, these systems go for drums or IBCs, so specific type and volume of packaging. But they are European, or even global. So you can ship a container from here to North America and it's still collected in the same systems. And the main purpose of the system is the reuse first. It's not the material recycling. So the aiming is to check first, can we make use of the product or the packaging itself? And only the second cycle is the material recycling. What is needed for this, or that this systems work really well, is that you have hassle-free transport across Europe. So we have a lot of recollection hubs for used packaging, but we only, for example, here on the map, you see the 2 light dots of our setup in Europe. So that is basically the recycling facilities. So the packaging itself is collected close by, but to generate critical recycling mass, we need to have centralized hubs on the material recycling. So just to give you a brief estimate, because that is not only done by Mauser, so it's also other people doing this kind of business. So there's a European organization, just to give you an estimate, what is the size of the market? So collected in 2020, steel, forget about the steel drums, but the collection, it was above 1 million steel drums and above 6 million composite IBCs that have been collected by roughly 28 companies around Europe. So it's quite substantial, and I want to re-emphasize that reuse is also an important part of the puzzle, talking about circularity in our business. However, it's not about reuse, this conference, it's about recycling. So what is the interesting part here, or the important part of generating also suitable recyclate is that we can use these systems, these recollection systems, to really generate dedicated recycled materials. So we can offer here, and then that is a typical industry setup at this moment, you can offer all kinds of levels between reuse and reconditioning. So washing a container or exchanging parts, repairing it, but as said, also generating recyclates, use them in monolayer and multi-layer. That is quite common practice at this moment in the industry. So you have dedicated collection schemes. I think that is important for us, because that allows us to track the history of the products, where we often fill dangerous goods in this packaging. So it's quite important. I think also nobody is interested that this packaging ends up in the typical consumer packaging recollection schemes. So, and it's also a commercial benefit, because basically the return logistics, we use them once for the return and the recycled materials. So we clearly see a benefit in combining reuse and recycling, and who knows what else might add to the circle at a different stage. Coming back to what materials we need, and I think that is also important to understand for our kind of products. So it's really high viscous HDPE that is used in our products, and that is quite specific. It's not used in consumer packaging, and it's also difficult to operate in the typical recycling plants for consumer waste. So to get these materials, we really, or the industry, needed to set up own recycling facilities to a certain degree. We also need to track the history, because regulation requires. So we have here a well interlink between the collection of the manufacturing. So we do everything throughout the supply chain. We have a selected inbound stream. We can track the history. We generate materials that are already by the sorting in a certain range of right specifications that we need. And there's also a reference to a dedicated ISO norm that is basically regulating the use of recyclate in industrial packaging. And this ISO norm requires this kind of dedicated scheme, and especially the history tracking. So what is really key for the use of recyclates in our industry is a clear transparency along the supply chain. What can we do out of this kind of recyclates? And that is basically what you see on this slide is basically a summary of the innovations or the developments we did throughout, or which the industry developed also throughout the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years. You have different setups. So we can do a drum as a monolayer drum. That is basically then you can do up to 98% of recyclates. However, this product usage is limited to certain end markets like the waste industry, and you can also not achieve every UN certificate for the transport of dangerous goods. So there's a clear tendency to go for multi-layer packaging, but this multi-layer does not include at this moment any functional barrier or different type of material. So if we talk about multi-layer, it's HDPE only multi-layer, and in a setup that is concentrating then the PCR content in the outer. And if we talk about a 2-layer structure, or if we talk about a 3-layer structure in an encapsulated middle layer, so that we make sure that the filling good itself does not come into contact with the recyclates. The reason for doing so is that the customers are still quite concerned about any cross-contamination or potential cross-contamination of recyclates with their filling goods. Was also important to understand in this slide, and I highlighted it. So the layer setup is not really representing then the maximum of PCR you can put in the packaging, because this packaging is made in blow molding, and you always have with the process, you have flash that you also have to take care of. So there's always process regrind that we have to fill into the next product, and we can also only fill in the remaining part with PCR. So there are limitations, and the limitations for multi-layer setup are in the range of 50% on a technical perspective. So that does not mean we have sold any products or convinced our customers to use this product, so that is still on top, but the technical boundary is around 50%. So multi-layer is where at least I see the future for this kind of usage with PCR. For this, we need investments, not only in recycling facilities and recycling technology, but also on the blow molding equipment for this kind of packaging. And that takes time to really install the equipment. And as said, there are technical limitations on the maximum PCR content. Another important aspect in our industry is the regulatory challenges. So that is basically, as I already mentioned, we are talking often about transport of dangerous goods, which is roughly 70% of the products that is going into the plastic drums and IBCs. So, and you basically have two main documents. That one is the transport regulation for transport of dangerous goods. So the Orange Book on a global basis, and the RIT RDA on a European basis. And you have a referenced ISO standard, the 16103, that is setting the scene for use of recyclates in this kind of packaging. And it's quite historic regulation that comes with regular updates. But if you look at the details of those regulations, you often find situations where the use of recyclates is explicitly not allowed. And I think around 2-3 years ago, the industry, we really looked at this kind of regulation and triggered some exercise to start changes that will allow use of recyclates also in this kind of applications in the near future. So a positive example is clearly, if you look at the upper left, there is a composite IBC. Up to the last revision of the regulation, that was not allowed to use recyclates for the inner containers of these kind of IBCs. And in 2019, the Global Organization of Manufacturers, but together also with the Reconditioners, launched a successful advocate in Geneva to change the regulations. So since January 2021, on a global perspective, it is allowed to use recyclates. However, the transition period for European regulation is still 2 years more. So you can see the time frame is quite extended if you want to change this kind of regulation. Nevertheless, this is the key to really make the changes. So I see regulatory requirements on mandatory PCR content that can be an initiator for more use of PCR. But in the end, it's a change of existing regulations that every industry has to deal with. That is, in the end, the enabler that allows the real transfer in doing this kind of packaging. So it's still an ongoing challenge, but we are making success, and that brings me basically to the summary of my presentation. So we see consumer packaging clearly in the focus of the discussions as an industrial packaging manufacturer and also for transport packaging. That is sometimes a little scary because your specific requirements are not often reflected in these discussions. So I would really advocate to keeping also the specifics of these kind of applications in mind. Always, but that fits to all kind of packaging. Think about the application or in applications. So PCR content or reuse, that is an essential function that we need to address. But also we have to keep in mind there's a certain performance required for our goods. We need to think European, and not only European, but in our business also global. So setting the regulatory framework is important on a global scale, but also the implementation. So we will really run into a problem if we have the European regulation will develop in a different direction than the rest of the world. This changes in regulation, but also the investments related to increased use of recyclates that take time. And my pledge would be, we need to be ambitious for sure, and we are ambitious, but we also need to be realistic. I think Patricia mentioned the 5% of PCR used in packaging. So be realistic on the targets and also especially on the implementation and for the timeline of the implementation. And last but not least, recycling and use of PCR is important, but it's even more effective if we really look at it in a context of circularity in complete. So look at resource efficiency, circularity, include reuse, and also chemical recycling or whatever is coming up in the future. And in my personal belief, I think the carbon reduction at the end will be the topic of that we will talk in the future most. So in summary, I hope I could show a little that industry is engaged in the topic, and happy to answer any questions if you have some.
Thank you very much, Klaus. That was a very exhaustive presentation from your side. Actually, we got 3 questions, so I think I'll go through the 3 of them. So the first one says, often you hear that for achieving a similar product performance, you may need more recycled input from mechanical recycling than the corresponding virgin material to reach the same performance in a drop test or for strength. So what is your experience in that regard? And also it's asked if you have data about it.
It's quite difficult. Honestly, I did not get complete because I have to read it after. I think that is a little what I try to show also on the slides, showing also the multi-layer approach. So basically, per our experience, yes, we have figures, and per our experience, for example, if we talk a composite IBC, to achieve the same performance as in the mechanical testing as with a product made from virgin, I think the maximum that we can include here in this setup at this moment for the bottle is around 40%. So, and then we also pass this this kind of drop test, but it's also going in line with another level or another approach that we run with our customers. Is always requesting what is really needed. So ask your clients what is really the demand that they have. So if we talk about this recycled packaging or the packaging with recycled content, we always compare it to our fit for purpose products made from virgin. So we are not intending at this moment really to reach the high end of our packaging portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Another question is, how do you deal with contamination from more difficult to clean products that were transported?
I think that is also a clear question on what on the sorting of the material you get as an inbound stream. Yeah, so it's clearly that not all of the packaging that are collected in this recollection schemes for this specific products can also be used as an input stream for recycled materials. And here that is really the benefit also from the combination of reuse and recycling, because if you get the complete package, you at least have a clear marking on it or labeling on it. So there you know the history, and that is the place where you can sort the material correctly.
Another question, since your last slide was about certain calls, let's say, for the industry, but for policymakers. The question that is raised here is, for transport packaging, what would be an appropriate target timeline for implementation from your perspective? Like, for example, 2030 or 2035?
That relates a little to the question, what is a target to be implemented? Yeah, so if we talk about 50% of PCR content, then I have a certain doubt that I can name any timing. Yeah, so if we talk about, I think we reviewed also this in the beginning throughout the industry, and at that time it was still considered to be an ambitious goal already to talk about 20% recycled content. And I think my best guess would be that if we go on like we have started, that is a reachable target also for industrial packaging in the range of 2030, maybe a little earlier. Okay,
well, we still have 9 years, then it should be feasible.
Yeah, if it's according to my wish, I'm not so sure on the actual discussion. I hear 2025 often, then it's only 4 years, and then I have to say, that is a stretch.
Indeed. So the last question that I will pose you is, do the drums, which contain recycled material, fulfill the needed mechanical properties such as compression pressure as well as the odor of the drums? Or do you think there is something to improve to get a better quality of the recycled material to reach these requirements?
There's always something to improve, but the simple answer is yes. So the drums of the recycled content, they are tested and UN approved the same as the drums from the virgin. So you have to, and this is a requirement to get a UN certification. You have to pass mechanical design type tests, and also you have to pass, if you talk about packaging for liquids, the testing with certain pre-storage and in chemicals that you have to prove. Yeah, so but as the rest of verticulates, if you talk with customers, I would see, for example, the smell is something that clearly is there's still too much variation, and we have to improve the recycling technology we are using at this moment.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Klaus, for this first part. I'll see you later for the final Q&A. And I'll go to Venetia Spencer with her presentation. So Venetia is the Secretary General of the Polyolefins Circular Economy Platform since January 2018. And previously, she led the environmental and energy team at Basel, Kohn and Wolf Brussels, which is a global public affairs strategic corporate communication consultancy. And for over 10 years, she advised companies, trade associations, civil society, and EU institutions how to identify the solutions to the challenges, engage with each other, and successfully communicate their stories. And prior to consultancy, she has also worked in the European Parliament. She's passionate about environment, science-based policy, and communication, and has worked on a broad range of environmental issues in European and global fora. And last but not least, she holds a degree in physics from the Imperial College in London. So Venetia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sylvia. I think the last but not least is a reference to my degree to explain how I ended up in such a technical job. But let me, having spent a whole career in policy, but thank you so much for the invitation and a really interesting session so far, and lots of things to comment on, but hopefully this presentation about what PSEP's bringing to the transition for the industry can add a little bit, and yeah, obviously always look forward to questions from the audience as well. Let me just share my screen. This will work.
Yeah, it works. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, thanks very much everyone for having us. So hopefully many of you have heard already of PSEP, but I just kind of always like to start by thinking, well, why a specific platform dedicated to polyolefins as a plastic material for circular economy? And these figures should match almost perfectly with the data that Patricia showed from Plastics Europe, as we use a very similar study with the similar design with the same consultant, but looking explicitly at the share and the role of polyolefins within Europe. And so when you look at demand for plastics, obviously polyolefins as a family of polymers is the dominant plastic in use across the economy. Nearly 49% of all of Europe's plastic demand is the polyolefin industry. And when we're looking inside packaging, that goes up quite dramatically. So almost 70% of all European plastic packaging is being made with a polyolefin. But from a circularity perspective, it's also, of course, really important to look at the end of life and that collected plastic waste. And there you see that the post-consumer plastic waste, yeah, 2/3 of that is going to be a polyolefin. And from the perspective of PSEP, which is an organization dedicated to driving the transition to a circular economy, it's also important to look at, of that fraction of polyolefin waste, what is it that we are recycling most and producing our recycled content from most today? And the answer is clearly our packaging. So I think there are two points here that I want to make. First, just the scale of polyolefins within the world of plastics, I think, means that we have a responsibility as an industry to drive circularity and an ability to help catalyze circularity for colleagues with other polymers and across all the different sectors where polyolefins are used. And also, given the sort of dominance of packaging within the polyolefin industry and within the speed at which that comes to its end of life and gets collected and its share of collection, packaging is a very, very important linchpin for us in terms of making early moves towards circularity. But the goal of PSEP is total transition from a linear economy model to a circular economy model for all polyolefins in all applications, which effectively means across all sectors of the economy. And that's a very big goal, and it's definitely not something that can be done alone. It's very hard to do as an individual company. It's very hard to do even in excellent organizations where you are with all your peers from your stage in the value chain, because the whole point of a circular economy is we're talking about a system. And as I think Klaus just demonstrated so well, a lot of what you need to know in order to use recycled content isn't necessarily, or has not traditionally been, within your own remit. It's about talking with others in the industry about understanding the source, the collection, what's possible from the recycling technology. And so PSEP was founded to provide a platform where we could bring everybody together, understand each other's businesses and needs, and work collectively and collaboratively towards driving that change. So we seek to bring together members from right across our circular value chains. We have pollen resin producers, we have converters, we have some of the brands and increasingly some of the retailers who are really very close to the consumers and the distribution. We work with the waste management industry and with the recyclers, and also with lots of other very important companies involved, people who make machinery and sorting technologies and provide additives, with the collection organizations like the packaging recovery organization. So there's a whole ecosystem of people whose opinions and expertise are needed if we're going to design a transition that works well and works as quickly as we can make it. And of course, you know, then the obvious question is, how on earth do you bring all those different businesses and people together? You know, what do you point towards? And so where we started with PSEP was some very, what we see as very ambitious commitments, voluntary commitments for increasing recycled content. This is our pledge. Sylvia and Patricia talked about the Circular Plastics Alliance. This was the PSEP pledge to increase the demand of post-consumer recycled polyolefin in use in products by the equivalent of pretty much half of all of Africa's elephants. But to put that in a more normal number, it's an increase of 1 million tonnes in the next 4 years by 2025. So going from a baseline of 2 million tonne of post-consumer polyolefin recyclate to try and ensure 3 million tonnes of post-consumer polyolefin recyclate by 2025. Bearing in mind that our largest market is packaging, and most of that is food packaging, and I will talk about this later, but it was already mentioned earlier, that of course is a market that currently today has very, very limited ability to use recycled polyolefin. So 2025 is just around the corner, and making these kinds of significant uptake in recycled content are really, I think, quite ambitious commitments from the industry. We also have commitments around design for recycling, around improving and enhancing our collection and sorting systems. I'm sure there's another one, but for the moment it slips my mind. I'm sure, however, on the PSEP website you can find all of this information. And the way we sort of structured PSEP, how to come together, is to try and divide up this big question of a system into manageable chunks and activities. So we have 6 real areas of work. We work a lot on innovation for the circular economy. There's a group looking particularly at design and guidelines and standards, but also keeping track of the amazing pace of innovation in technology and business models that's going on all around us in the plastics industry. We have a group explicitly looking, and I'll talk a fair bit today about activities here, about how do we develop new markets for recycled polyolefin and expand existing markets for recycled polyolefin. Enhancing collection and sorting, it's been said already today, it's fundamental part of the system. How do we get hold of our material and then manage that in such a way that we end up with significant volumes of suitably sorted material at one location to make that recycling into a high quality secondary raw material economically viable. Advocating for supportive regulatory framework is a very important stream of work. There's an enormous amount of legislation that's around this that is seeking to encourage this transition, and I think it's very important that it's all as coherent as possible, so that we're all steering in the same direction. Communicating advances on that journey to polyolefin circularity is another stream of work at PSEP. My colleagues in other materials sometimes do, in fact, regularly do an excellent job of demonstrating circularity in particular products, but when you pause to look at where you find recycled polyolefin, it's actually everywhere already, and there's great advances being made week to week, really, in what is possible and what's being done. So we're trying to bring some of that a bit more to light. And here's the last, but definitely by no means least, actually understanding these material flows and the data and seeing what's available and sharing that information within the industry is really vital as well to make progress. So that's a bit of an introduction to PSEP and what we're trying to achieve. Maybe to show you some specific examples. One of the things that became apparent early on in my time at PSEP was that, you know, facilitating this secondary raw materials market and this flow of and confidence in recycled materials from a recycler to a converter is absolutely fundamental. And a big part of that is characterizing the recyclate. So really, what's in the recyclate? What can it do? What do you want to know about this batch of recyclate? And one of the big reasons why this is so important is the massive difference in volume. When you buy virgin polyolefin from a resin producer, you will be buying very significant batches. You know, a batch of virgin polyolefin might be 30,000 tonnes. At a recycler, that batch is 1,000 tonnes. To get the same amount of material and to know that it's all of one quality, that you can use it to produce whatever you're making, from packaging products to car parts, really knowing about the recyclate and its quality in order to have volumes at the same quality consistently is very, very important. So we've been working for a couple of years now, and I hope we will finalize it and be able to share it publicly before the summer on a sort of the value chains point of view of what is it that really you should know in order to have confidence in the material. And we've looked at critical properties. So there are lots of standards on recycled polyethylene and polypropylene, but we've looked at, you know, what do you really have to know and what's kind of nice to know, not just the property, but also how to measure it. So a recommendation on the standard measurement methodologies to use, so that again, when you're looking at this information coming from your recyclers, you know it's comparable and consistent. We've also gone beyond some of the, I suppose, traditional data sheet thinking and looked at waste origin, looked at recommendations from recyclers on the processing suitability. So recyclers almost, you know, have a really good knowledge of what their material can do, and they can really give that advice as to what you might want to use this recycled material for. And things like compliance. So Klaus mentioned that traceability and transparency in the supply chain is vital. Couldn't agree more. I think this is an ever increasingly important aspect of making this transition work. So this is one piece of the communications, and actually the other, I think, vital piece about this market that I don't have a slide on, so I shall mention now, which came up this morning as well, is designing from recyclates. So it's fundamentally important that we design to make things recyclable, and that means, you know, actually identified, collected, sorted, and recycled somewhere. But it's also really important that we consider the functionality of our products. So are we over specifying? Can we actually design that from materials we can produce today? And I think that's a very important question for everyone, and a very important discussion to continue having when we're you know, putting together and designing new products. Recycled polyolefins in food contact. So yeah, this one is massive. So as I mentioned, polyolefins are the dominant plastic in packaging. Within that, I think the average consideration of what's food to non-food contact packaging is probably 70-30. So, you know, a back of the envelope calculation would tell you that food contact packaging is the largest market for polyolefins today. And it's therefore clearly a market that as PSEP we cannot fail in. We are here and we exist to work on the transition to circularity, and that means also circularity in our food contact applications. And that's packaging, it's also consumer electronics. So we have a working group explicitly looking at this and how to bring recycled polyolefin into food and near food end markets, and I reference the near food end markets because in lots of other applications, be they cosmetics packaging or toys, you have very, very similar requirements for the, for want of a better word, the cleanliness of the recycled content and the properties of the recycled content, and they're very similar in many respects to food contact. So this is also, it's not just an important end market in itself, it's a very important journey for the polyolefin industry, because the journey opens up, you know, what we all commonly refer to as near food markets as well. So just to talk a bit about what we're doing, so we're tracking the innovations and activities that are going on across Europe. We have a fundamental principle at PSEP to try and avoid duplication. So we are all about collaboration and working together, not trying to redo what has been done elsewhere or is being done. So an important activity to keep an eye on this. And there's lots going on in this space with work in France, with work in the UK, with work in Austria, and in fact, all across Europe. We're looking to support and expand the existing approved recycled polyolefin markets. So again, I noticed someone mentioned in the chat earlier, there aren't approved rPET markets either. We're talking here about positive opinions from EFSA, but there are positive opinions from EFSA for recycled polyolefin in some food contact applications. And there are some national authorizations for that use. And we are very much looking at how can we support and expand those and raise awareness of that. We also want, and this is the really fundamental piece here, to make sure we establish a scientific framework that evaluates the safety of recycled polyolefins that is designed explicitly for polyolefins. You can't take a scientific evaluation framework for PET and apply it to polyolefin. They're different plastics. They have different properties, different behaviors, and we need to be absolutely certain that recycled polyolefins in these applications are safe. And so we're looking at this. And a large part of that question is understanding the feedstock. So understanding how we sort to meet the requirement of it having been a food contact application, food contact use in the first place. What kind of cross-contamination issues do we get from the way in which we collect and sort? So I don't know where you all are, but here in Brussels, I now get to put all my packaging in my blue recycling bag, but that means I put all my polyolefins in together, from my shampoo to my cleaning products to my food contact packaging. So we have to understand what happens there, you know, in the 6 odd weeks or so that my packaging items are all rammed together, what kind of cross-contamination might be happening. And we of course need to understand what might be going on in terms of misuse of that food contact packaging. All of that is really to understand what should we be looking for when we're trying to prove that our recyclates are clean. What is it we should be looking for? And as an industry, I think the onus sits on us to answer that question and to reassure the authorities that we know what we're talking about. And that's a big part of the discussion when you go and seek an approval or an authorization or positive opinion for the recyclate itself, for the recycled plastic. Another big part of this is just ensuring that all of our recycling technologies have an authorization pathway and have clear legal recognition. Clearly, the role of chemical recycling to produce new feedstock for virgin monomer production is a vital one for going back into food contact. That's the one recycling technology with absolutely no question about the safety of the plastics that you would be using, but doesn't have crystal clear legal certainty today. So this is a really important one. But we also want to make sure that the legal framework is clear and applies to all the evolving recycling technologies. And Patricia mentioned dissolution, and in polyolefins, you have a lot of innovation going on in these sort of physical recycling processes that take normally a mechanical sorting step followed by a solvent-based cleaning process and produce a very, very high grade of recyclate. And they also need to be in the system. We need to know today that those markets have a future and a clear use and where they can be taken up and used in recycled content. So this is a big piece of work going on in PSEP, and yeah, always happy to take questions. Another nice one, I think, just follows on nicely from Klaus's talking about transport packaging. So one of the things we try and do at PSEP is demonstrate, as I said, to expand end markets and demonstrate new ones. This is kind of a getting your house in order market for the polyolefin industry itself. So in lots of other sectors, particularly in the retail industry, you will find that when it comes to transport pallets, there's been quite a shift from wooden pallets to those made from recycled plastic. And these are pallets that are made from 100% post-consumer polyolefins. And by and large, like under the best kind of pooling conditions, you can have up to 30% less CO2 from your transport logistics if you're using them. And we're not currently using them in our own industry, in the petrochemical industry, for various reasons. And so PSEP has a project which we hope to launch shortly to really demonstrate and gain acceptance of these pallets within our own industry, so additive suppliers, resin producers and plastics converters, so that we can standardize those pallets and help move the industry into this. And standards are really critical here, because a pooling system, in a reuse model, a pooling system with whatever it is, whoever's doing the collection and return only works if there's an element of standardization. So these pallets, today the wooden pallets are all standardized. So we need those standards for the recycled pallets, so that we can then pool those pallets and ensure that we lower the environmental footprint of our own industry, and also use the post-consumer recycled content in this application, which on paper at least is a bit of a no-brainer. I want to talk a bit about the scale of the transformation. So again, you'll see the link to the numbers Patricia showed for the whole plastics industry. But if in 2018 the polyolefin demand in Europe was 24 million tons, the following year we collected just shy of 18 million tons, 17.5 million tons of post-consumer polyolefin waste. Sadly, over a fifth of that is still going to disposal, by which I mean landfill or incineration without energy recovery. 43% of it went to energy recovery, and then 35% of it was sent for recycling. So lots to do here in terms of making sure that all the material we do collect today can go to recycling. And I think that's really important to know. But it's also very important to understand the investment required there, because there's a very large difference between the amount of polyolefins we collect today and the amount of polyolefin recycling capacity we actually have on the ground in Europe. And so one of the things that PSEP has always called for is that particularly the recovery packages following up from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also just generally funding that is aligned to a carbon neutral economy, has got to put in place on the ground the infrastructure that we need to make the material circular. To look a little bit about what we did produce in 2019, which is already great growth compared to 2016, which was the previous baseline study PSEP had done. So we, as I said, sent sort of 35% of the waste went for recycling. Around 5 million tons of that went to European recyclers. Just over 1 million tons back in 2019 was still being exported for recycling. And that produced around 2.5 million tons of post-consumer recyclates, with just a shy of 500,000 ton being exported. And I think that exported recyclates reflects also the fact that in other markets you have different rules and acceptance for what kind of recycled content you can use. So at the moment, Europe is indeed exporting some of our recyclates rather than being able to take them up here, which is another aspect for us all to address together. Yeah, just a few final words. I think part of the role of PSEP is to provide that unique voice to really look at polyolefins as a material, and we do that in advocacy spaces and engaging with the institutions, but also a lot in the communication space. And there is so much to talk about. The huge variety of the ways in which you can use recycled polyolefin is almost a bit daunting. But it shouldn't be dismissed. It needs to be understood. You know, there's enormous amounts of end markets, and some of these are highly technical. I mean, there's a picture there of a roofing membrane, so the technical flexibles application that's 100% recycled polyolefin. And I think sometimes, you know, obviously these are the best in class examples, but showcasing them, I think, helps us, you know, where one can succeed, others can learn. So perhaps I'd take a small moment of promotion to encourage you all to pop along to our website and download our first annual report, where you can see some of those case studies and some of the advances in recycled content use that the industry is making. And maybe a last word, I'd encourage more members of the polyolefin system to join us and to help us find the solutions together. It's a challenge increasing the uptake of recycled content in different applications, but there is definite benefit to doing that work collectively and to sharing that knowledge and focusing our combined talents on the end goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venetia. I have some questions for you. One was one of the first, which is what influence and or involvement does PSEP have or plan to have with other global platforms or other organizations involved in facilitating promoting plastics recycling outside of Europe?
Outside of Europe, that's a good question right now. So a lot of our members have, obviously, as is often the case in these platforms, sort of mutual membership of organizations. So many of them are members of the Alliance to End Plastics Waste, for example. But I have to say, I think you mentioned in my introduction, Sylvia, PSEP is quite young. We've been around just over 2 years now as an entity. And so our focus is very much European at the moment. But I think, you know, from my perspective, the more the industry comes together in these fora and understands things, the easier it is to identify and then influence global issues. The UN transport of dangerous goods was one we spotted back in 2019, and I was delighted to see in Klaus's presentation the progress the industry has been making there.
Another question is that it seems that one participant noticed that your focus is on recycling of polyolefins on mechanical recycling. It's based on mechanical recycling. And what is your view on the chemical monomeric recycling of polyolefins?
Yeah, so probably didn't write it on the slide. I hope I said it out loud. I think at PSEP it's very clear that we need all recycling technologies. You know, what did I show you? 24 million tons of demand, and we have 2.5 million tons of post-consumer recyclates, plus maybe another couple of million tons of pre-consumer recyclates. That is still a very long way from circular. And there are lots of applications that require very high standards of functionality. So I think what we need is advances across all forms of recycling technology. And that includes enabling and supporting what I tend to refer to as feedstock recycling. So the forms of chemical recycling that generate feedstock for crackers to make fresh, brand new polyolefins. But it also involves advances in mechanical recycling, new forms of physical recycling, and lots of advances in collection and sourcing as well, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Another question is about the ratio between collection of food packaging, so of post-consumer waste, and production of food and non-food packaging, which was previously estimated to be, 70 to 30%. Mm-hmm. Does it differ today? Do you see a difference?
I don't know, but I do think it's a very good question. I think generally when it comes to packaging, right, the common philosophy is that most packaging has a life cycle within the space of a sort of 1 year time frame. There are obvious exceptions to that rule. So you would tend to expect the ratio to be the same. That having been said, as I say that out loud, Sylvia, I can already see the flaw in that logic, which is that, of course, it's in the non-food contact area, things like industrial and transport packaging, where you have packaging with a lot more reuse and therefore a much longer life cycle. So actually, that answer could be completely wrong. I think we better take an action to look into it.
And so I have just one final question, which is very interesting, where it says, it's a very long one, but it says, in order to increase the recycling rate of plastics and to reach the targets given by the EU, it's essential also that flexible packaging is also recycled. This means that recyclers need to be ready for further investments in sorting and proper recycling. So without any commitment on their side, any efforts of brand owners, converters will be useless. How can PSEP support this?
I think there are efforts being made on all sides, to be honest, and it's exactly by bringing everyone together to have those conversations that PSEP does support that. It's very clear that for flexible packaging, collection is one of the first things that has to be solved, particularly for household flexible packaging. Industrial flexible packaging, polyolefins, there's a very different business. But yeah, collection is a very important thing. You obviously can't recycle anything you don't collect. So deeming something unrecyclable today simply because it wasn't collected yesterday is clearly not appropriate. And I think that ties into the need for some transition. There's a lot of polyolefins that aren't recycled, not because they couldn't be, but because we don't have necessarily the infrastructure in place. Putting that infrastructure in place is a high investment. So knowing that there's certainty of the continued polyolefin markets is very important. And pretty much everything we do at PSEP is all about generating that, trying to find that exact balance win-win to make sure we have a sustainable polyolefin industry.
Okay. Well, I thank you very much, Venetia, for your time.
You're welcome, Sylvia. And I did notice earlier a question about RPP in the US. And
yes.
And maybe just because the answer is fundamentally one of regulatory approach. So there are quite a few letters of non-objection in the US for recycled food contact polyolefins, PP and HDPE, and some of the flexibles. But this is more of a difference in detail and burden of proof in terms of the origin of the waste, and also the way the decontamination is measured. So in the US system, if you can't explicitly prove decontamination, you can use migration data to prove no risk, and that's not so common yet in Europe, but that's all part of this conversation of what is safe and what can we prove.
Well, that's very interesting, and definitely work to be done ahead of us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Venetia. Thank you for this presentation. So we move now to Herman van Rost. Herman, welcome. So after a diverse petrochemical career at ExxonMobil and Total, Herman launched in 2014 Total's activity in the circular economy for plastics, in his role as Business Development Manager Recycling. In this position, also he participated to the World of Plastics Waste and Recycling as President of Clarevel and as board member of FOS Plus and Baloplast. And since 2019, he has joined SES, a Styrenic Circular Solution, as General Manager, Feedstock and Mechanical Recycling, closing the polystyrene loop from yogurt cup to yogurt cup, and hopefully other applications. So, Ervan, yes, you can share your presentation.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.
I'm going to make it in presentation mode. That's
perfect.
It. Does
yes,
that work?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be present at this high-level circularity webinar. And my contribution is about a conceptual contribution that we made to the CPA standardization work about circular procurement, actually, and specifically for, obviously, recycled content demand stimulation. Already mentioned a couple of times by previous speakers. A few slides just to explain who we are. Styrenic Circular Solutions is the circular value chain association of the styrenics industry. And basically, you may very well picture us as similar to PCEP, similar to PETCOR, and obviously we focus on styrenic polymers. And it's a critical thing for circularity to have a joint industry initiatives, the cooperation, driving innovation, etc. And our work domains and competency domains are recycling technologies, all of them, the mechanical, the dissolution, and the chemical technologies. Feedstock, it's about waste and collection. Also design for recycling. We recently launched the specific work group on that. Recycled content and circular advocacy. Actually, circular advocacy, this is, let's say, where an interesting point. We have been thinking what would be specific advocacy needed by the styrenics industry and for circularity. And actually, there is almost nothing. Everything that will stimulate plastic circularity will also stimulate styrenics. And so that's why we have decided to fully contribute our efforts and competencies to the CPA. Our members, we are a growing association. We started mainly with the styrenics producers, but we have also the main converters here, and also actors from the waste world, like Tomra. There's also recyclers, part of us, and this is still growing. Actually, we have a quite impressive track record of which we are proud. In the last years, actually, we started from very far, from very low. Actually, in the beginning, 2018, the entire industry was convinced that you could sort styrenics from other polymers, but not within the different types of styrenics. Let's say the HIPS, the GPPS, XPS, and so on. That proved completely wrong. And in 2018, we have proven the excellent sortability, which is the basis of a very good circularity, actually. 2019, we have demonstrated how to produce a high purity polystyrene recyclate from packaging waste. Actually, we have developed a process very much similar to the PET process, but a bit, let's say, an improved version of it and adapted to the needs of polystyrene packaging, and with the intention to go back to yogurt pots. In 2020, we proved also that we are capable to go back to food contact technically. Yeah, the suitability was demonstrated. It was also demonstrate by our converters that they can use it, and all the properties, it's really a drop-in solution. And in this year, you have heard probably that we have applied to the European Food Safety Agency for food contact recognition. There is an upcoming event on the life cycle assessment, and there is more to come. So we're proud to be a very dynamic player in this field. Actually, it is with that spirit that we contribute to the CPA. As I said, circular styrenics will thrive in a world of circular plastics. So let's create that world, and let's contribute to it. And as Patricia already said, actually in the CPA, we have observed that the main barriers for recyclate uptake are, first of all, adequate quality of the recyclate. A second concern of potential customers wanting to buy recycled content is how about availability and how about supply security? Yeah? And then, yeah, a question often asked is, what about competitiveness? And also, this is a question by recyclers, saying what would be a fair price versus virgin, and how deep should we go, and what happens if virgin prices are very low because capacity have been added, and so there is kind of things to solve there. So we have also identified in which domains should we work to improve the situation, and it's clearly design for recycling is a very important one. Collection and sorting, there's a lot of things to do and to improve, but it's already very far, but there's going to be a lot of additional investment. The recycling processes, well, there's a lot to do there as well in order to have that adequate quality, and of course, in order to increase the capacity. And finally, we come to the subject, which is the subject of today, combined to the competitiveness there. It's how to stimulate demand, because and basically we will not talk in this because it's a huge field to talk about. But our focus is today this circular procurement, which fits in the demand stimulation. It's at the end of the chain, and the CPA is about demand. Of course, afterwards you need to come with the offer. But in our industry, what is really driving everything is demand, not just pushing regulations. And the difficulty is a little bit that we have to stimulate already demand in order to stimulate innovation, because it's in an environment where this adequate quality might be available, but maybe not yet, or maybe at a too low availability. And so this is an increasing. Otherwise probably it would be more easy. By the way, you don't see here in the table technology, investment, and monitoring. That's because they are everywhere. They will contribute to these four, right? Now, in order to understand what should be improved, we should first understand what the problem is today. And actually, in current procurement world, which is still very much based on and which was developed in a linear economy, what we see is a very unbalanced purchasing power versus selling power of recycling. And I'm talking about an environment where there is no doubt about the quality. There is no doubt about the availability. It is just this unbalanced position. And the reason is that recyclates in this environment are mainly, let's say, bought as an opportunistic material that can replace virgin in certain applications. And of course, it has to come with a good reason. Yeah? In a linear economy, there is no such reason except price. And that is because, let's say, polymer properties, any, can be given much better by virgin than recyclate. So if you are a recycler and you're competing in this world, then your position is actually not so good, because the recyclates in general, they have some limitations in the markets. Very often there is a problem with food contact, which is not possible. Even if it's not food contact, it might be a concern for skin contact, or but but let's say you are facing a buyer which is capable to use your material. But if there is no deal, maybe you have no outlet. At the buyer side, there is all a luxury position actually, because, okay, might be interesting, let's see what we can obtain. And if there is no deal, well, I can simply use virgin or even upgrade also at a very much reduced price. And so basically, there are very few alternative options for the seller, for the recycler, but many options for the buyer. And the buyer occupies actually the scarcity position versus the seller. Yeah, and so in association theory or in game theory, it really means that there is a lot of power at the buyer's place. And typically, what they said, okay, I can accept your recyclate, but now what will you do to convince me to buy? And yeah, there goes the price. I mean, how deep can you go, especially knowing that you're also competing with off-grade? And so this explains that even if you solve the quality, even if you solve the availability, there is still this problem, and that is the subject. Solving that is the subject of today. Now, a circular economy is an economy that is characterized by interest for recycled content, demand for recycled content. Actually, the demand can be driven by just because the customers like it. There's a culture of liking recycled content, or it can be imposed by regulation, or it can be the policy of corporations. It can be whatever, but there is demand. Now, that is interesting because while every other polymer property can be given much better by virgin, that is not at all the case with recycled content. Recycled content is actually the only thing that virgin cannot give much better than recyclate. And so suddenly this changes completely the situation. Actually, where at the buyer's side, suddenly you see, okay, this is going to stay, this demand, my customers or my corporate policy is that, or there is a regulation or whatever. I will need a strategic long-term supply, and the virgin cannot help me here. So I may have alternatives, certainly, and there's others, but it will always be recyclers. So basically, the discussion will be completely different. You said, okay, guys, the price is very important, but okay, are you ready to work on the quality? Are you fitting in my strategy to increase volume, etc.? So this, and at the other side, suddenly the recycler finds himself in a completely different position, saying, "Whoa, okay, here is an opportunity. I always wanted to improve my quality, but I couldn't do it at -35 or -45%. Now here, this offers my opportunity to do the right investment, but because the technology exists actually to make excellent recyclates, as we have, by the way, proven in Styrenic Circular Solutions. It works also for Polyolefins. And so basically, on top of that, the relation is much more balanced, because he's holding the circular scarcity. And so the result will be they say, okay, basically, I'm ready to work towards your needs, but you give me a long-term contract. And so basically, the parties will find each other in a completely different way. Now, how to do that? How to do that in an environment where we all know that today, let's say this is clearly stimulating. And so creating demand for recycled content is going to stimulate this all this environment. But at the moment that maybe the quality is not yet completely there, or it might be there, but you don't know it as a buyer. So how to do that? So let's say, conceptually, procurement in linear economy is about, you have a specification and bidding specification with technical properties and other elements, and there is a procedure that first looks at that first compares the offers with this bidding specification. Are they in line, yes or no? Well, let's make a short list, and then amongst the short list, what is the lowest price? That's the logic. I mean, it's also fair, it's ethical, this is how competition works. And recyclate, of course, may be the winning bid if it corresponds to the technical specification, but this will always be on the lowest price anyway. And that doesn't even reflect the unbalanced negotiation situation which may come after this. Now, so how to do this, how to cope with this and uncertainty, basically, because if you simply add, okay, let's add the minimum X% recycled content to the bidding specification. Well, it might work, but there is a big risk that it doesn't work because it does not exist. Maybe it's not yet available on the market. And so as a buyer, you may be faced with a situation where you don't have offers, which is terrible because you have to go back. So another thing, if it is available, well, maybe you are not triggering or stimulating. Let's say you're not really triggering innovation because maybe you're just below what could be possible. And basically, by doing that, then you are pulling the circular market downwards, which is not your intention if you do that. And then at the end also the question is how will you choose between different percentages recycled content? Is it going to be simply the lowest price above your minimum, or will you be attracted by a higher price? I mean, there's more work to do, that's for sure. Yeah. So maybe you can simply do it in the procurement procedure. Well, at least the first decision you will have to make yourself, maybe even before starting the bidding, is to what, let's say, price advantage will we be able, are we ready to give for recycled content? How much extra euros per every, so let's say, slice of 10% recycled content that should be established before. And that then allows your offers to be compared. So because you can have a lowest price, but corrected for the percent recycled content. Of course, if nobody knows that between the bidders, then maybe you will not get any. So at least you should at least mention that, guys, do your best. We will have advantage for recycled content. Still, this kind of message, advantage for recycled content, it's a qualitative, interesting thing. One thing already, one advantage here is at least that if it's not available on the market, then you fall back on the virgin situation. Okay, at least you will have seen. Okay, apparently there is none. But the most, let's say, the most stimulating way is, first of all, if you make up your mind about to what extent will I be ready to pay more for recycled content? Well, at least put it there, make it public, because that is really what will create an attraction for the market. It will stimulate innovation, and a recycler who is close to these technical properties may do an extra effort to say, wow, I would not have done it because anyway, but if there is a price advantage, maybe I do it. So this is probably the most, it's an equally fair and ethic procedure how to do that. If you want to go for recycle, if you want to include recycled content, and if you want to stimulate this the take-up and create a real demand for recycled content. Advantages are, first of all, there is no risk of unavailability because the fallback is virgin, right? There is also no risk of underspecifying, because the current availability, technical feasibility is what you will get. Then by doing so, setting up this thing, it's an internal effort, it's a project, it will create a lot of discussions, and it will generate a cultural change, which is really one of the most important things in a circular economy, making sure that recyclates are simply accepted by engineers. And so that barriers, which you will find internally, in norms and in procedures, that they get removed, okay? So the effort is really a healthy effort to switch from a linear to a circular procurement procedure. And then obviously category managers who are the experts to know what exists in the market, how is the market or the supply market structured and what is existing there in terms of technical things. They will at least also learn what recycled content is available in all these, in each segment. Yeah? And so there's a lot of learning externally as well by that. And then there's another advantage. Instead of just having a corporate ambition, well, at least you translate it visually in a hard contribution to circularity. It will not only be appreciated by recyclers, but also it's a visual thing. I am, let's say, it's a very hard message to say, I'm ready to pay so much more for so much percent recycled content. So it's also externally an interesting message. Also for the seller, obviously, there are advantages. First of all, those who can offer recycled content, well, they get a financial reward for past innovations, but they get also stimulated for extra innovation. Yeah? Also, it generates here visual value for recycled content. It creates a sort of new market, actually. You can say, well, okay, here you have X% extra, or this amount more for in this market is more interesting, is more attracting recycled content than the other market. And so this kind of thing. And on top of that, not to underestimate, the type of communication between buyer and seller will completely change. Instead of having a kind of price negotiation, tender type, very narrow discussion, after some basic technical questions, of course, suddenly it will be a highly qualitative link, communication that you have with buyers about what specific added value is there from recycled content, from your technology as a recycler to the position of this customer, about strategic partnerships, etc. So that's these are huge advantage in a world of commerce, actually. Now, there's a couple of conditions in order to make it work. First of all, technical specifications have to be clean from unnecessary or hidden barriers. Let's say unnecessary specifications, actually. Sometimes, well, that's what happened. In the beginning, plastics was for toys only. And so it received, and now I'm talking about in the years 1950, it received a sort of fake image. And in order to become credible, there was a lot of norms that were made, and that they had to specify virgin, it's not recycled, it's coming from this process, because that was the only way how to guarantee that certain qualities would be met. Right? So there's many norms out there specifying either in an open way that it has to be virgin, that cannot be recycled, or in a more hidden way by exaggerated properties. Okay. You will need the market will need recycled content certification, because I mean, if a party wins on this new basis a tender, without being the cheapest, but on the basis of most attractive recycled content value versus price, then I mean, that has to be certified somewhere. Imagine that it would appear to be wrong. Oh, well, then parties will claim certainly, and then there is it would open a lot of uncertainty about this kind of thing. So the world of certifications will become we have to become much more important. There is already certifications in several regions or several countries, but it should be best that it is that there is a European certification, of course. Oh, okay, I would say I call this circularity first, because there will be a tendency, as we have seen already in the past, to say, okay, together with recycled content, I will add to this concept a number of other green targets, right? Sustainability, etc. The thing is, it is almost always much easier to add these green sustainability topics than recycled content. So what happens if you don't give a priority to the circularity, that you say it has to be circular, and then only we look at other characteristics? Well, if you don't do that, it's very simple. You will be the presence of these green attributes will be simply a ticket to linearity. It will be the explanation. Look how nice, and unfortunately, it's not circular. But so, and this is not how you will create a circular economy. And by the way, it is the way how a circular economy was almost was made very difficult until today. Then I mentioned management support, because management is everything about finances and money and so on. And so it's sometimes it may be easier to pronounce an ambition than to have it, than to feel it in the wallet. And so basically that should be by a sort of circular procurement policy. Yeah? How could that look like? I've imagined here, I mean, well, you can, let's say what could be done is that for a typical product category A, B, or C, well, the situation in the market may be different. In some categories, it may be easy to obtain 50% recycled content. In others, totally not, or not. And so basically, you should by category or by subcategories define something that reflects the current situation, or something that can be expected in the near future, as a bronze, silver, gold level. Let's say in category A here, I said, okay, 30, 50, 80%, right? And in another B, it's bronze is already in the zero, because it doesn't, it's very, very rare that is existent. So gold, 20% is already putting on gold, this type of thing. And so you can make some differentiation, and then a pure procurement policy can simply express the ambition as, okay, we need for every category minimum bronze, right? And overall weighted level has to be silver. And for specific categories where I have a particular sensitivity, there I need gold. This could inspire procurement managers and corporate managers to define an ambition in a balanced way, taking into account what they observe in the market, and still going for dedicated recycled content in this kind of scheme. Now, there's a very interesting additional potential, because let's say in the CPA, and since long we are faced with authorities who are very interested in the circular economy, and they are actually today probably the biggest pushers and demanders and askers, because they realize the potential for society. They feel also the interest of people. And in the beginning, let's say since long, they act as a regulator, and they act mainly based typically on the waste side of this chain, and because the chain is circular, starting from the physical flow goes from the waste to recyclers, converters, final goods, etc. But they also work on the design for recycling sometimes a tendency to mandatory recycled content also. So that is then applying on the final goods producers. And a very, let's say, oxygen providing thing is also that they also want to act as a stimulator to create demand, and the CPA is actually very positive effort to that extent. And the demand is actually what is going to make it attractive and to make it a real part of the economy. But there is another very important role, actually. They can play the role, and they do play the role of an economic actor. That is a very strong role in this thing, because demand is something that you cannot push. Demand is demand. It starts at the end. And from the end, it moves back to the beginning of the chain. And obviously, by doing that, it will have an effect on the other end users as well. And basically, how realistic is that? How important can it be done? Well, it is impressive how the size of public procurement is impressive. Huh? We're talking about €2 trillion in the EU, which is 14% of the gross domestic product in the EU. And this is just for the public procurement. And to what is that spent? Well, you see there the list of all things, but it's clear that the military, the schools, the hospitals, everything actually that buys exactly or almost exactly the same things as the rest of the society for their functioning there. And so basically we can easily say that the public authorities are the single largest actor on the market. And so it makes that they can play a very exemplary role. And if 14% is of the gross domestic product, if these 14% contain on average the same percentage of plastics as the other 86%, well, then that corresponds to 7 million tons. Imagine that 50% of that would over time become recycled, then we're talking about a direct potential of 3.5 million tons. That's really huge. So we should not overlook that actually. Basically, they're not only important by their size, but they are important because they are a high-level market reference. Private offering and private demand actually tends to adapt to public specs. And so they are an actor highly visible and highly influential. They have this ethics exemplarity. That's, by the way, why today public offering or public has to be based on lowest price, because that's the only criterion that is fair for everybody. Well, today, I'm sure that in this circular economy, that the interest of society is definitely pushing authorities to not just spend the money. Of course, they have to spend the money responsibly, but responsibly, what does it mean? In the past, it definitely meant best value for money. Now it should become best circular value for money. And I'm sure there is a lot of support for that. And then they are also very well positioned for accelerated learning compared to the rest of the industry. Why? Because they have much more freedom to exchange between each other what they observe in the market, best procurement practices, etc. So they tend to copy. I mean, if there is a sort of a standard established at EU level or at a national level, it tends to be to influence standards at lower levels, and there is certainly exchanges between public agents in order to see how can we participate, can we do this together, etc. So this is it's an interesting position they have there. And of course, what you can also do easier than private industry is to attach awards. or winners of successful bidders, actually, if it is based on circularity. This is typically their situation. Now, there is one extra reason why I would really recommend to public for this kind of impact or effort by public authorities. It is the learning by doing. All actors, all industry actors who have, let's say, started working in this direction have learned the most exactly by doing, by the starting, not just by observing and studying and working together. No, do by doing. And there is I expect and I anticipate that there's going to be a very healthy effect for public authorities of this effort, this project of setting up and also operating a public procurement standard, basically finding out what is available in which sector, instead of finding it out from statistics or so. If you try to buy it, you will find is it there or not. How much is there? What is the quality? And what kind of stream and what is still not available. So then you will discover, like all other industrial actors doing that, the barriers in your own regulations, in own technical norms, where actually nobody realized, but there is actually good reason why it cannot be done if we follow our own regulations. So things have to be changed. This will also generate internal cultural change. Overcome the resistance and the reluctance of internal experts. It's something that happens to all the actors. There is not a company that suddenly switches to very high circular dynamic because the boss has decided so. No. It is you need this kind of cultural change, and in itself it will prove to be a very highly effective thing, and the time is ready for it. And face the concerns of the procurement community, because procurement has been about, this is the rule, this is the bidding specification, and then I need the lowest price. Already changing that is going to create some, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a cultural change, actually. But the knowledge developed by doing that will be extremely efficient to develop internal competencies at the authorities level, at the CPA level, and within these organizations for spontaneous steering towards circularity by effective measures and market stimuli, rather than asking, what can I do to help the industry, or by let's say ordering consultants to bring the answers. This will be the most effective thing. Based on that, I wish to thank you, and I put here a slide. On the 30th of June, there is something interesting to learn at our upcoming webinar about the life cycle assessment. Thank you very much. Sylvia, over to you. Back.
Thank you, Armand. That was a long presentation. So we are actually running a little bit late, but still I'll make your question. One is about your concept of circularity. So what is your view of virgin producers that are about linearity and are trying to play in these collaborative circular platforms? Pricing fluctuation plays a role in the offer and demand scheme. What happens if recycled material become a serious supply feedstock?
The question is, what happens if recyclates become equivalent supply feedstock?
Yes.
As virgin?
Yes.
Well, we will gradually move into the circular economy, and that is exactly what we are trying to do. Yeah, so that's exactly what most of our companies trying to do. Look at their websites. So.
I think that's why we are all here now at the end of the day.
Absolutely. This is why the 282 companies at the CPA are trying to work very hard together in order to achieve all this. And, and we can use everybody's good ideas to do it.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much, Armand. I will now pass the floor to Isabel Schmidt. So Arman, if you can close your presentation, please. And so Isabel is Dr. Isabel Schmidt is the Managing Director of Circular Economy of IK, which is an Kunststoffverpackungen, which is the German Association for Plastics Packaging and Fields. She holds a Master of Science in Geoecology and is a Doctor of Science from Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. So as said, she works at IK, which represents today 300 companies producing plastics packaging for the German market. And she's responsible for circular economy, sustainable development. And prior to joining IK, Isabel has worked many years in sustainability consultancy assurance at KPMG in Cologne and Johannesburg, and also at BSF as eco-efficiency analyst. So Isabel, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Sylvia. And as a co-host, IK is co-host of this webinar, I also would like to welcome everyone. And I'm amazed about the huge amount of people who are interested in the topic, which is a really good sign for the industry. Thanks a lot. And please apologize, I might skip a few slides of my presentation just to make up for the time. But you will receive all slides afterwards. So I hope you can see my presentation now. Just a little correction, Sylvia, we have 300 member companies producing all kinds of plastics packaging, bulk packaging, household packaging, flexible, rigid. And Germany is a very important country with regard to packaging production. Almost 1/4 of the packaging production takes place in Germany. A lot of it is also being exported. Well, we all know the political goals. That's why we are meeting here. We have above all the Green Deal that is striving for climate neutrality by 2050, and therefore recycled plastics will have to become our source of raw material in the future. Our products will have to become climate neutral, and it's a whole transformation. The whole industry needs to be transformed, and it's a huge challenge. And as the EU Commission and the Circular Plastics Alliance that we are part of are striving for 10 million tons of recycled plastics in products by 2025, we are very much supporting that goal. We have therefore set ourselves the goal to increase the uptake of recycled materials in plastic packaging production in Germany to 1 million tons. This is in line with the European ambition. Oops, sorry. And and we've actually we were starting in 2017 at a baseline of 400,000 tons, counting in post-industrial recyclates. Since then, within 2 years, until 2019, we've seen a huge increase of more than 18% of recycled materials. And in the same time, we've seen a slight drop of virgin demand. So we already have a decoupling of trends here in virgin demand and demand of recycled materials, which is indicating the huge interest of the market. But still there's it's quite an ambition. We will have to triple the amount of post-consumer recyclates in plastics packaging until 2025 if we want to achieve our 1 million ton goal. We've done an analysis on the technical use potential of recycled materials in plastics packaging. And that came up that in average, 22%, so close to 1 million tons, of the raw material demand of our sector could be supplied by the recycling industry. That is based on currently available qualities, PCR qualities, but these qualities only have a very limited availability until now. And it's also based on the assumption that moderate quality restrictions are accepted. I'm talking here about aesthetics and also material efficiency. And it's also based on the assumption that we can count post-industrial recyclates in the 22%. So for this, our industry needs an additional 410 kilotons of PCR in defined qualities. And when I'm talking about qualities, for instance, here we have the example of different kinds of PE films. Well, you heard from the previous presentations that there are different quality requirements. One that is particular for recycled materials is highlighted here. It's a low variation from batch to batch. This is one of the factors that make it a bit challenging at the moment to use recycled materials. And then there are, well, converters can deal with the variation of physical parameters. As long as it's relatively constant, they do not need virgin-like qualities. They can deal with the variation as long as these parameters are within certain boundaries and are not fluctuating too much. So I think the barriers have been highlighted already, especially we have very different markets. We have some markets with very high quality requirements, especially the food market and the near food market, which is quite large. Then we have markets where we are already using PCR qualities that could be increased by increasing the availability of large amounts in consistent qualities. Then we have demand barriers, so acceptance must be there on the market as well for instance, for slight aesthetic impairments. And we've been talking about the price performance ratio to virgin plastics. So a year ago, actually in June 2020, together with the AGVU, we issued a discussion paper on different legal instruments to increase the uptake of recycled materials. There's the QR code that you can use to get access to the paper. AGVU represents the whole value chain, including dual systems, disposal companies, and recyclers. And first, we agreed on important principles that regulation needs to fulfill. It obviously needs to fulfill its target, which is to effectively increase the recycled plastics in the overall market. Then secondly, product quality and safety is key. Thirdly, we need to preserve market economy principles because planned economies are not creating the same qualities and wealth as market economies. We have to avoid competitive disadvantages with regard to non-EU markets. We have to ensure free movement of goods. And last but not least, we have to enable enforcement. In the paper, we look at different models. Mandatory recycled content for certain products is the first one that we looked at, because this is what the Commission has already announced in the Circular Economy Action Plan. As an alternative, we looked at virgin polymer substitution rates and at financial incentive schemes that are all aiming at increasing recycled content in products. Don't think I need to explain what mandatory recycled content is about. That has been explained already. Everyone knows we already have the example of the beverage bottle mandatory recycled content by 2025. Then an alternative or additional model could be virgin polymer substitution rates, meaning that here the legislator would set a legally defined quota for the virgin plastic sales that must be substituted by recycled materials. So that would create a relative shortage of virgin plastics on the market and make them more expensive. And that would then stimulate the demand for recycled materials. One of the advantages is that the legislator does not need to regulate exactly into which applications the material has to go to, because market self-regulation would then ensure that the materials first go into such markets where the barriers are the lowest, where the economic, the legal barriers. We also are looking at financial incentives. The principle is clear, not a quota, not a legal obligation. It's an incentive to help. Like we have different models here, like extended product responsibility and CO2 pricing. There's a range of different models. If we look at the principles that we established first, the first one was to effectively increase recycled plastics in the overall market. Then we can see that with product regulated mandatory recycled content on the left-hand side, an increase but will partly at least be, we will also see partly redirection of recycled materials from non-regulated markets to regulated markets. So this is always a certain risk. In the middle, we have the virgin polymer substitution rates that would really make sure quotas are met. And in the case of financial incentivations on the right-hand side, the whole design of the financial incentives. Then we have ensuring product quality and safety, which is a risk with product-related legislation in the case that the availability of the recycled material is sufficient. When it comes to virgin polymer substitution rates in the middle, still a risk, but it's mitigated because we have the freedom of the market to choose in which applications the recycled materials go to. When we choose financial incentive, no real risk for the market. Yeah, when we look at preserving market economy principles, product product-related regulation is a major intervention in the freedom of product design, and it's associated with the risk of price increases if enough recycled materials in the regulated markets. And it goes as far as that we are really facing a risk of unjustified marketing bans for our industry, in case that it's not sure that we have the right amounts and the right qualities of recycled materials in the market. I think it still needs to be examined further, but we assume that the risks are really mitigated with regard to virgin polymer substitution rates, and with financial incentives, we are not facing such risks. Well, avoiding competitive disadvantages will always, in all three cases, require that we have EU-wide regulation and also obligations for non-EU imports. Same for free movement of goods within the EU, we need EU-wide regulation. Enforcement is key, as I said earlier, because there's a huge risk for, in case of non-compliance, there's a huge reputation risk for our. We need proper enforcement by member state authorities. And in the case of product-related mandatory recycled content, my fear is that this is really a huge risk because there are so many legal entities and products that needs to be controlled. And because of time, I'm going a bit further. What we need to accept is that a circular economy is a shared responsibility. And legislation must address all steps of the supply circle with the same binding force in order to avoid material and quality losses in the loop and enable all economic operators to fulfill their legal obligations. We have therefore set a list of criteria that need to be established in the case that we get mandatory recycled content, because we understand that this is more than likely to happen. But yeah, I'm at the end of my presentation, but maybe I go back to that slide. Thank you. Sylvia?
Yes, I forgot to put the microphone. Yes, thank you very much, Isabel. That was also very, very on-time presentation. I have one question for you, which is, which legislation could be proposed to introduce mandatory recycled content obligation, and which legislation could be introduced on chemicals recycling?
Well, the legislation, this is now what we think that the risk must not be put on one, on the packaging. We need the same kind of obligations then also on the supply side if we have mandatory recycled content. And it could actually be a mix of different policy options. Of course, we need also, we need at each of the 5 steps that you can see here on the picture, we need measures, but measures of the same binding force. Mm-hmm. And what was the second question?
The second question was about, yes, about how to work on what should be the obligation for chemical recycling.
Well, first of all, I think we should be open to all kind of innovations, and there will be more than only one loop in a circular economy. We need to exploit mechanical recycling to its maximum, also through design for recycling, because it's the most economic and most probably also the most CO2 and ecological option. But on top, we will also need, we will always have a loss of CO2 of material, because we will always need to combustion to a certain percentage, and we will have to think of more circles, like a chemical recycling circle, but maybe also even a CO2 circle that comes back through renewable resources into plastics.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have a question for you, but also for the other speakers who can start to join us for a final round, because it's already 1:30. The question is, it's something that came up, I think, in few of the presentation that we heard today, which is, living with the current scenarios of certain packaging of certain applications, and working on legislation that will be effective in 4 years, if not longer from now. So how to let's say, to cope with this, that we have a certain knowledge of things, but then we also don't know what the future holds. So what do you think about this?
Was this question to everyone?
Yeah, to you,
okay.
To you, but also for the others, yes. To you, you can reply first, but I would like to know the view also of the other speakers.
Okay, then maybe take someone else. I have to read this question again.
No, it's okay. Mine. It's not written. Okay. No, my question is, again, it's for Herman, for Klaus, or Patricia. So we today work with a certain status quo when it comes to technology and the status of recycling. Chemical recycling is still in development. We're working today under, for example, the revision of the packaging directive with a future obligation or legislation that will come up and will be effective not before the 2025, if not later. So I wonder how we can find solution today and how to improve writing legislation today for the future and to make it future-proof.
Well, I think that we need flexibility in all legislation that allows also for future developments, technical developments. For instance, talking a lot about this in the Circular Plastics Alliance, design for recycling, which is a precondition for a circular economy, but it's we are also expecting further development in technology, in sorting and recycling technology, and I think to make it future proof, we need in legislation some kind of flexibility to adapt to innovation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Klaus or maybe Herman, so I would also like to hear your thoughts. Also take into consideration that today we still have some limits. I'm thinking, for example, of the price issue when it comes to recyclates versus virgin. I'm thinking of the availability of materials. So we will get there in terms of we will resolve certain of the preconditions that are necessary also for the future.
Yes, I'm totally convinced that we will get there. So for me, and I think Herman also mentioned it in his presentation, I think one of the important things would also be, do it. We can always think about 2025 or 2030 and the targets we have, but already today we have certain options. And I think also Venetia put it out in her presentation with the pellets, or the example of the pellets. If you really look in your industry and what you are doing, there are options that you can take. But I also would always encourage, it's use of recyclates. It's circular economy, but circular economy has multiple levels, and I really would encourage that we look at all of these levels. Mm-hmm. There was also a question, I think, there's always a discussion, what is the main or superior target? Is it circularity or is it reduction of carbon emission? In my opinion, it has to go hand in hand.
Yes, no, I totally agree. I think also we have to look at the bigger picture and understand that sustainability passes through many criteria, which is not only recyclability or recycled content, let's say too cool, but you know, it's a bigger picture. Herman, I also would hear your thoughts.
If I may, yes, indeed. I think one of the strongest things we can do is continue cooperating. The level of cooperation today in the industry throughout the value chains, the different value chains, is much, much higher than in the past. And this is really the basic condition to create this circular economy. And the only thing we should hope is that that there is no additional burdens put in the way of it. But this is the most positive signal, I believe, the cooperation and because the level of, let's say, circular economy is a great thing for innovation and cooperation, and the innovations that have to be done are not really at one place in the chain. They have to take into account burdens and constraints at the other part of the chain. This makes me really very positive about evolution today.
Indeed, that's a positive outlook. Patricia, also your thoughts on all of this?
On this positive note, it's perhaps worthwhile to then add, there's an enormous momentum within the industry building and really driving this change, which is great to see. Also from a policy framework, this is an enormous momentum to come with policy and legislation in terms, I would say two main things here from Plastics Europe's perspective. Then we need a European harmonized policy framework. It was mentioned by everyone. I mean, the single market in Europe is incredibly important, and we see fragmentation for the moment. So we need to come up and foster European harmonized policy framework. And the second one for us as producers, as we are actively engaged in chemical recycling and having even enhanced the upcoming volumes and investments in chemical recycling. But for that, we need again a strong policy framework which goes combined with a workable and trusted mass balance system that counts towards the recycled content and products. Because now in the past it was all about recycling targets. Now we talk really about recycled content, which is a shift which requires a thinking which goes beyond mechanical recycling. And we still have the mechanical recycling in mind, which will increase and grow, which is totally different when it comes to the recycled content for chemical recycling. So two important things, I mean, a workable and trusted mass balance system and a European harmonized policy framework.
Yes, I think I cannot agree more, and I guess also the others. So I think we can close and wrap up this webinar. Unfortunately, Venetia had to leave, so she would like to excuse herself because she couldn't stay longer. And I thank you, the speakers and the registrants that participated so far with your questions. As said, the presentation and the recording of this webinar will be available afterwards. If you have further questions to the speakers, feel free to contact them directly. Their emails are in their presentation. So thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you from IK and UPC for being there. And hopefully we meet by person. I'm talking especially with the Brussels colleagues and in the next webinar in October.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.